that energizes you a little bit. And just a reminder of kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it. You all are absolutely essential to the success of the grant and the project, especially being treatment faculty. So I'm really appreciative of all of you, and can't wait to talk more about metacognition. So just to kind of jump right into the agenda that's in your folder, just a brief review of what metacognition is and what it isn't. So to do the review, we're going to have a little pop quiz. It's anonymous, so this is why you're all bringing your devices. We're going to use Socrative. So if you can log in, with your phone or your laptop, whatever you may have, to socrative.com. Is anyone not familiar with Socrative? It's kind of like clickers. If you don't have clickers, you can always have students just use Socrative. It's a free account for anyone. You're assigned a room name, and that room name stays consistent across your, no matter how many quizzes you get, it's your assigned room name. So when you go to Socrative, you would click login, student login, and then the room name is here. Yeah, it's not open yet, so as soon as everyone has the room name written down, I'll go ahead and log in and open the quiz. Go ahead and open it. If you need the room name, just let me know. So we'll not require names. But if you're ever doing a Socrative quiz, this is kind of what it looks like. So you would set it up first. You can offer instant feedback. So once a student submits an answer, then they can get feedback on whether they got it right or wrong. And it also shows them any additional feedback you want, like maybe what page number they can find the information and things like that. You can do teacher paced or not, so they can go at their own pace, or you can click each one. When I do it, I usually require names because I do participation points for them. Things like that. Okay, so you should see the first question on your device. It says blank is built on logical thinking and analytical thinking, but then goes a step further, using the results of logic and analysis to draw distinctions between two or more options and make a judgment or decision. Is that metacognition, critical thinking, and it's perfectly fine if you have no idea.
Why is it so small? Can we expand the size?
Because it's under.
Oh, it's on.
Yeah, it's also on the devices.
That's okay.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's much better.
Okay, so it shows we have 11 out of 11 students who have answered. So how did we do? All right, 55%, we have majority. Got that one right. Maybe a little bit of a trick question. So that one is actually critical thinking, not metacognition. So metacognition requires one additional step, which we'll talk about in just a second. We'll go to the next one. This one says, blank is thinking about thinking. It is the process of learning how your mind works. I hope everyone gets this right. Okay, so critical thinking is very similar to metacognition, but metacognition takes it a step further. So it's critical thinking with self-reflection. So you have to kind of think back and evaluate your understanding of what you know and what you don't know. So an easy way to think about metacognition is by thinking of critical thinking plus that added component of self-awareness or self-evaluation. We'll go to the next one. There's 10 questions. So it says, one key aspect of blank is to apply blank to your own thinking. See how we did? All right, very good. So one key aspect of metacognition is to apply critical thinking to your own thinking. So again, it's that self-reflection, self-awareness of how well you know, and what you don't know. Right, number 4, interactive games promote metacognitive awareness in the class. How do we do? Okay, so this one is maybe. So why is this one maybe? Someone who
Because it depends on if you do it correctly. You know, if you're just playing, a random game, then you're not helping them think about how they engage with the material.
Mm-hmm.
But if your game is metacognitively based, then it can.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So like if you're just doing an interactive game, that's fine, but if you want to make it metacognitive, you have to add that piece on the end about self-reflection of their performance. So after the game, you want to be sure to bring them back. So how well did you do? What can you do differently going forward?
What strategies work for you?
Exactly, what strategies works for you. So it has the potential, but you kind of have to do a little bit more to make it metacognitive. Let's see, number 5. Increased metacognitive awareness can help students who are overconfident in their understanding of material. Okay, how did we do? True, very good. So yes, metacognitive awareness helps students to become more accurate in assessing what they know, what they don't know. And one byproduct that we may see is students go to office hours more often because they're more aware of what they need help with. And we may actually hear students say more that they don't know what's going on as compared to if we weren't doing the metacognitive intervention. So they may be more accurate in those self-evaluations. Number 6, there are 2 stages of metacognition. All right, so this one is false. How many stages? 3. 3 stages. So what are our 3 stages? Planning, monitoring,
Evaluation.
Yeah, reflection or evaluation. Yeah, exactly. And metacognition can happen at each one of these stages. I know it's been a long summer. It's okay. That's why we're here. So those are 3 stages: planning, monitoring, and evaluating. So metacognition can take place in each one of those stages. So as students are planning to complete an assignment or reading, they may want to think about how much time is it going to take to do this reading? What resources do I need to know before I can do this? What do I have everything that I need? The monitoring stage, as I'm doing this assignment, what am I learning that I didn't know before? What changes in my knowledge? What questions do I need to ask once I get to class after doing this assignment? And then in our last stage, evaluation, what would I do differently? Do I still have any lingering questions, things like that? So metacognitive awareness can take place in each of those 3 stages: planning, monitoring, and evaluating. Number 7, metacognition is the same as reflection. So we'll see how we did for this one. This one is false, but I could see why someone might put true for this one, because it is self-reflection. So the way that we tend to think about metacognition is that reflection is a stage in metacognition, like the 3rd stage. But there's still the other 2 stages of planning and monitoring, one's knowledge and awareness. Number 8, quizzes help students to become more metacognitively aware. That one was quick. All right, so why is this one maybe?
It's similar to us, the other. It depends on how you want to.
Yeah, exactly. So if we give a quiz but don't give students feedback, then it's not very metacognitive because they can't use that information to self-assess their understanding. So quizzes are a great way to increase metacognitive awareness, but they require that we give students feedback so that they can then evaluate their understanding. All right, almost done. Number 9, when students perform key course concepts, they become more metacognitively aware. So how did we do on this one? All right, so again, this one's maybe for the same reason. So I put these 3 questions in here about performing, quizzing, and games because I see that a lot on the biweekly surveys. As far as for the questions, what are you doing to increase metacognitive awareness in the classroom? And it's kind of hard to interpret those because they can go either way. So I just wanted to highlight that all of those, quizzing, performance, and what's the other one?
Games.
Thank you, pregnancy brain, games. they can be metacognitive, but you have to do something on top of that. You know, you have to have students to reflect back and assess their understanding. In addition to that, so just in the future, in biweekly surveys, if you happen to do any of those, maybe just add a piece about how you made it metacognitive. That'll let us know for sure that this was a metacognitive behavior. And then our last question, making students self-aware of their understanding and encouraging behavioral change based on their awareness is an essential feature of metacognitive instruction. So on this one, True, yes, 100%. This is the essential feature. So all of the things that we talk about as far as planning, monitoring, evaluating, synthesizing, modeling, all of those things are trying to get us to this point. So they're all tools to help students to become more self-aware of their understanding so that they can then make some change based on that new understanding. And if they, if they're doing fine, then that's great. But if they do need to make a change, then hopefully after having this increased awareness, they can do that. So go ahead and finish this. If you're ever doing a Socrative quiz, you can email yourself grades. Just nice to, it'll send it in a spreadsheet. It's very easy. Okay. So self-aware, making students become self-aware of their understanding. Again, requires assessment and feedback. So we have to first assess what the student knows what they don't know, and then provide them some type of feedback so that they can then use that information. In order to do that, we have to give students objective gauges. We'll talk about some different objective gauges that you can use in the classroom to help students to become more accurate, better calibrated in their awareness of their understanding. So students need to understand how to use feedback. So sometimes I'm guilty of this also, just giving students back a quiz, showing what they got right, what they got wrong. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe we need to go a little bit further and actually give them feedback that they can use going forward. Maybe give them the opportunity to use the feedback effectively, so points for using the feedback. So maybe submitting a revision of a quiz or a paper. We can give assignments that require metacognitive awareness. So asking questions about how well do you know what you know, problems where they can assess their understanding of what they need to know. So if this is the situation, what do you need to know before you can tackle this problem, things like that. And then with more metacognitive awareness, again, students will become more accurate in their evaluations of their understanding, which is what we want.
I just had a quick question, but given like, for instance, for the critical essay, we're not allowed to, let them turn them in and, return them in after we give them their grade.
Mm-hmm.
So could it be a possibility for us to be allowed to do that to increase metacognitive?
I don't know if maybe if they show you to you or do like drafts. I don't know if that's allowed.
I would suggest drafts rather than having them turn in the final and then.
Well, I mean, we do drafts, but I mean,
right.
Sometimes even after turning in the final piece, because many of them don't even understand the draft situation. So even though we're doing drafts, they're still like, it's still a outline, or they're still trying to figure out how to write a thesis at that point. So they don't have the full paper. So then they turn in the full paper and it's like, okay, this isn't up to where we need to be because they're still working through the writing process.
I think it just creates unnecessary comparisons between faculty teaching, differently about writing. And my experience from teaching writing in the English department has been that the stages of the draft, if you could have them turn in something before the final, which is very close to it, you will get them to understand revision and then also understand there is a final product that will be evaluated. And they tend to adapt to it.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I use that in my class, but some of them, because they still don't, many of the students that are freshmen are like, I've only had to write a 5-paragraph essay. So they're still trying to figure out how to expand a paper to our 5 to 7 pages. So even when they turn it in and, I'm saying like, this is your first draft, it's still not anywhere close to what their finished draft looks like sometimes.
I wonder if we could have them redo it, but have it count for something else, like have it count towards meaningful participation, attendance and meaningful participation. So just like you were saying, like giving them feedback, have them do something else with it. So, maybe that's not ideal because it doesn't factor into the critical essay grade, but it does factor into their grade and might encourage them to do something.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I tell them, because they will ask you, I'm saying, right, I tell them, I can't change your grade, but, because you're going to be writing for the rest of your, time here, I'll be more than happy to go over it and, give you some feedback. The grade will stay the same, but if you want to improve, yeah, I'll read it.
Thank you for that question. That was a great question because that is a good opportunity to give feedback. I didn't know about the no grade division. Yeah. So you've all seen this question. It's one of the last questions on the biweekly survey. How did you help students become self-aware of their level of understanding, learning during the weeks of? And I know this was a new question that we added last year to really kind of drive home the point of it all. We're trying to make students self-aware. So I just want to go over some anonymous responses that we pulled from the biweekly surveys. It's just examples. This is what we're going for versus some that may need improvement, may not. Maybe it just wasn't enough elaboration on the form for us to know what you did. If it looks familiar, I'm sorry. There's no names. So a good example of how you can help students to become more aware of their understanding. Someone said, students could correct each other's quizzes, so they could either get examples of correct answers from classmates or aid each other by explaining why an answer was incorrect, which I thought was a great example of how students can get immediate feedback on their level of understanding. One that maybe needs a little bit of improvement was talking about just connecting one story to another chapter, which may help students to become self-aware. It just didn't include the piece about the self-reflection of their understanding. So maybe by doing this activity, they became aware of what they know and didn't know. It just wasn't very clear. It is metacognitive though to have them do those connections. This one I thought was really interesting. Students had to repeat the information they learned in their separate groups multiple times through our speed dating discussion activity. Self-awareness also was brought up when some students realized they had made a mistake with their information, and before I sent them to re-examine the text, another student diplomatically pointed them in the right direction. I don't want to point anyone out, but is this someone in here? So I'm really curious about this speed dating discussion. Okay, well it sounds fun. Maybe going to one person, talking about a concept for 5 minutes, going to another person. That's what I imagine, something like that. And one that may need improvement or elaboration. Students reported what they liked most about a story and why it was the case. Just everyone kind of see why that one's there. So this is what I liked, but it doesn't have that self-reflection of understanding there. Just a couple of additional examples of so students had to come up with discussion questions for the class, which helped them to realize how difficult it can be at times to explain a concept clearly. So I think that's a great way to make students self-aware. If you had to teach this, or if you had to come up with test questions, what would it look like? And that really quickly will show them, am I able to teach this? If not, then I need to go back and study it. And then one that might need improvement, students related the story by sharing a challenge they encountered in their lives and how they overcame it. A great activity, but it may not help them to become self-aware of their understanding. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So for the needs improvement one, so what would you, for me to be clear, what would you add to make that more what you're looking for?
Let's see. Does anyone have any ideas of how you can make that more self-aware? So they're basically making it personally relevant.
Could it be something like what they learned about themselves or their skills or their weaknesses or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just adding that piece onto it would help with their self-awareness.
I think having them sort of justify like the like educational or scholarly relevance of their personal example, and sort of like how it helped or what it has to do with the text, like sort of holding them to that piece might make them kind of reflect on how they understood the text in terms of their.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of bringing it back to what they learned and how it can help them going forward. Absolutely. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
And then the last one, students noted the importance of learning West African mythology. Really important for students to know why they're learning things, but it requires a little bit more to help them become more self-aware of their understanding. Okay. We already talked about that. They'll be more accurate in their evaluations of understanding. So you may not hear students say as much that they understand. So when you ask class, is everyone clear on everything and we get to move on, you may see more hands shoot up because they're realizing that they don't understand as well as they need to. And then again, self-assessment can happen in each of our 3 stages: planning, monitoring, and evaluating. And another activity that you could do is ask students to predict their performance and then compare it afterwards. So maybe before a quiz or an exam, this is something that I did during 2 semesters in my class. So we had 5 exams and students were asked to predict their grade after each exam. On the first exam, there was a difference of about 15 points between their prediction and their actual grade. But by the end of the semester, it was average of just 3 points. So through metacognitive training and things like that, students became more accurate in their gauge of what they knew and what they didn't know. So that's a good way to kind of show students that over time you can get better at this.
To be good. I had to do something similar with a student who is known to clown herself in front of the class and how she doesn't know anything and how she'll never get it right and I'm going to do horrible at this. And when she killed the exam, I was like, come here, stand up. I was like, so I want you to turn this around and let's talk about why you thought that that's how you were going to do and what did you actually do to get the grade that you got because you did a good job. And I want you to stop talking about yourself in front of the class this way. So we were able to kind of change her thought process by comparing it against how she always downs herself. So
yeah, and it definitely goes both ways. The students, overestimate and they underestimate their abilities.
yes.
I just wanted to point this out because there is a cultural difference in this, of how you assess and how you perform. And I've noticed, and this is from my own experience coming from India, where students will do very well in exams, but they will always say, I didn't do well, I could have done better. And it's not anything to do with the fact that they don't know they're good students. It's just the way they see the outcomes as being something they can be happy about. And the expectations are geared towards, that kind of I don't know, it may be self-gratification that you can get. And also, we live in a community and we share with everybody. We don't assume to be knowing everything. And that's a cultural difference. And I wanted to just make that clear because students might come with those kinds of different, not necessarily that they don't have self-awareness. It could be actually an example of greater self-awareness.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really great point. Yeah. Expectation has a lot to do with it, and expectations of your own self and your performance, absolutely. So one thing that you can do to help students to become more self-aware is what's called a knowledge survey. So it's just a collection of questions to help students self-assess their understanding of course material. So again, first students would complete questions prior to each unit of the course. So this may be at the beginning of each week. And then also immediately prior to exams or quizzes. So it would be after the week, after the instruction.
Is this before they read, before the instruction, and then after?
So this would be before everything. So before they do the reading, before the instruction. And then when answering the questions, students would rate themselves on their ability to answer the question rather than fully answering the question. So they may not even answer the question itself. They may just say answer questions about how well they think they can answer questions like this. So similar to a confidence rating. And I'll show you an example on the next slide. And then the type of learning expectation is highlighted by including Bloom's level at the end of each question. So just as a reminder of Bloom's level, does everyone remember Bloom's? The different levels of understanding? Where it goes from rote learning to more meaningful learning. Does anyone remember what's at the bottom?
Yeah.
Remembering? So remembering. So remembering is the bottom level here. So can you define the terms? Can you recall them and recognize them? So what happens is a lot of students achieve that remembering level and they don't go any further, but they're really tested on something much higher. So they usually stop studying there. The next level is understanding. So not only can I remember this information, but I also understand it. So I can explain the reasoning behind the ideas or concepts. I can talk about the concepts and principles. And then the next step is higher level learning. Can I actually apply this information to a new or different situation, problem, or context? Can it transfer to a different situation? So most of the time our tests, our exams, our quizzes are more that applying level. But again, a lot of students don't study to that level because once they get to remembering or understanding, they stop there because they feel confident in their abilities. Then we go up to analyzing, evaluating, and then the ultimate level, creating, where we're synthesizing information in an original way. And it's really difficult for first-year students to get to that highest level. So I know we always talked about synthesizing, but it's okay if we can't get our students up to that creating level, because over time, they will get there. So those are our levels, and this is an example of a knowledge survey. So this one comes from kind of like a sensation perception class. So an example of a question is, I can explain the major trade-off for all sensory systems, and I would be able to illustrate this by describing eye designs from different creatures. So this would be at the understand level. And then the options here are just, I'm unable to perform this task at this time, I'm able to partially perform the task at this time, and I believe I can successfully perform the task for evaluation at this time. So again, the student's not necessarily answering the question, but they are rating their ability to answer a question like this. So by giving these types of questions at the beginning of a unit or a week, then students can evaluate kind of what they already know and what they need to look more into, and it can help them to pay more attention during when certain topics are discussed during class. And then you can see again that the level of blooms is there. So this is understand, this is remember, and you can have questions at each level.
So you do this at the beginning and then once you go over the material?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, so before they're tested or quizzed over it.
But what if, this sounds, it's kind of random, but what if the student answers, I am able to, after, just because it is expected that after you start in class, you should be able to answer a question of sensory systems.
Mm-hmm. So then maybe you want to, at that post, have them actually do it and see if they can before they're tested over it. So you said you could, now let's see it. And when it's still low stakes at that point, right? So they're not actually going to be graded heavily on it, and then that'll let them know before this is tested, maybe I can go back and that. I think that would also be beneficial in helping them see maybe they're not as calibrated as they need to be.
Would you do that, like, would you do that immediately after, is that what you're suggesting? Like say you're gonna do a quiz, and you have this as the pre-quiz, and then you have the quiz, just like right there, or one on Moodle like the day before, and then you have the quiz, but then I don't know how you correlate them.
Yeah, it's kind of whatever would work for you. Because I've done the post maybe like a week before an exam, and then that gives them time to go and make changes if they need to.
Yeah.
So just some of the benefits of doing knowledge surveys. So it serves as kind of a roadmap to guide students' learning efforts. So if you give them this before you even cover a concept, before they do the reading, it'll kind of serve as a guide of what to pay attention to during the lecture, the discussion, what to pay attention to in the reading, so that they know ultimately where they're supposed to be at the end of the lesson. So when students are clear, or when we're clear on what we want students to learn, they're able to judge if they have a solid understanding of those concepts and ask better questions in class. So again, we're trying to help them become more self-aware of their understanding before those high stakes. Students are more likely to come to office hours to ask questions, and are able to more clearly articulate what they do and do not understand prior to exams. And students realize that they need to study differently for questions at different levels of blooms. So they may do really well on those understanding, remembering level questions, but they may need to do more to get to those apply, create levels. And students become more accurate in assessing their understanding, again, prior to examinations. Okay, so I have a couple of handouts of just other tools you could use to help students to become more self-aware. Let's see, so the first one, the classroom assessment tools. And these are just really quick activities that you can do in class to help students to become more aware of their understanding. And some of these we've talked about before. So yeah, again, some of these we've talked about, like the ticket out the door, muddiest point. So before students leave, they write down any questions they have or things that they want clarification on. So that lets them know kind of where they need to focus their studying, and it also is something that you can address in the next class. So we'll go over all of these just for time, but something you can use in the class to help students to become more self-aware. And then the second handout, the metacognitive note-taking, is for the students. And it's really similar to the independent scholar worksheet that you created for us last year. So this sheet I love because students you can give it to them. I'll send you a Word document of it, or they can just kind of split up their own notebook or Word document, whatever they're typing on in class. So the class learning outcomes are at the top. So we know that's one thing we always want to do is let students know where we're going, what are the objectives, what are the outcomes of the lesson. That way they can write what they already know about that topic. In a class like FITW, students come in thinking they know a lot about what we're already talking about, concepts like race, gender, identity. So write what they already know, write their thoughts, so how they feel about the topic, any relationships or connections, so maybe how it relates to something they've already learned, any questions they have before the class begins. And then as they're going through the in-class discussion, they can write their notes, they can write any insights, maybe changes in knowledge that are occurring during the class session. A quick 2 to 3 sentence summary of the key concepts, and then the last part, the behavioral plans. So now that I have thought about this concept, I've looked at insights, what am I going to change to increase my knowledge or understanding of these concepts?
So this is before the actual comes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this could be something we give them maybe the first 5 minutes of class, or even at the end of class for the next class, just to get them thinking about how much they know about the concepts already. And so that really by the end of the class, through looking at their sheet, they should be confronted with any misconceptions that they may have had. So they can see in real time how their knowledge has changed or their understanding may have changed over the course of the lesson.
So maybe is this going to be on Moodle?
It can be, I can put it on Moodle, I can also email it to you. Yeah, so I can do either of
Tamika,
those.
who's credited with developing metacognition? Might not be just one person.
Yeah, it's lots of people, and it's been out for a while. I got psychology's education. Yeah, it was big for a while, and then it went away, and it came back. It's coming back, but up to
I was just
education.
wondering.
Huh?
I was just wondering.
I think it's so philosophical to me.
The meta.
Philosophers should be involved too.
Yeah, no, there's philosophy of mind.
Mhm.
It's like,
Yeah, that was my favorite philosophy class. Okay, so we talked about helping students to become self-aware. It's great. Now you know what you know what you don't know. But then what are you going to do after that? So what's going to actually be the behavioral change as a result of this increased knowledge? So this is the other question that you see at the end of the biweekly survey. So how did you encourage action or behavioral change based on students' awareness of their level of understanding? So again, I'll just pull a couple of examples from biweekly surveys. Is there a question? Oh, okay. So good examples of encouraging behavioral change. I shared my book with students and they saw my margin notes, which included prompts for me teaching and quizzes. They really learned a lot from my modeling how I learn. So modeling is great for encouraging behavioral change. If you want, bring your actual AEW book to class, show them your notes in the margin, because that's how we read. We take notes as we read. It's not just passive reading. I think that's a great strategy. One that might need improvement, I gave an informal oral quiz where each student had to respond to the question I posed. If a student could not answer, then another student picked up the slack. They were literally teaching and correcting each other to the point I was really not needed. Great example of reciprocal teaching. But there may need to be just another piece to help encourage behavioral change. So for example, if a student couldn't answer one of the questions and someone else had to pick up the slack, then they should make a note. This is something I need to go back and look over, or I need to go and seek additional help to understand this concept. Another good example, I asked students to put in writing their resolutions and to meet with me during office hours to discuss them. Great example of behavioral change. So what are you going to do? I'm going to hold you accountable. Come and see me to discuss your change. Needs improvement. We had a short activity in which the goal was to look up the institutions, most relevant names, etc. I asked them to outline a series of important information to look up about text as part of the act of reading. Great activity, but you may want to add a little bit to help them to realize that there needs to be change if they didn't understand some of those concepts. And then finally, another good example. Students must write about the actions they will continue, discard, or improve upon to consistently meet their learning goals. So another great example of encouraging behavioral change. Okay, and then one more handout. Exam wrappers or lesson wrappers. Does anyone use those in class? So this is something that you can do before an exam to have students think about their understanding. Again, you don't have to use any of these. You can use all of them, none of them. It's up to you. Just tools to encourage self-awareness and behavioral change. Just for the sake of time, I won't go over this one, but as you're going over it on your own time, feel free to let me know if you have any questions about anything. Okay. So I briefly wanted to just go over the questions in the biweekly survey to see if anyone was unclear on any of the questions here, because I know you see the same questions every 2 weeks, and it'll be the same this semester. So I want to see, just from you all, if you have any suggestions or things that you've used that have worked well for each one of these. So what does each metacognitive activity look like in your classroom? So the first behavior that's listed is providing opportunities for students to generate questions and react to peer statements. So is this something that someone thinks that they do well in their class? And what have you done?
Well, every week the students have to, prepare, come up with at least 3 questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to take, we might not have time to go through all of them, but we will always, entertain, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that they have to have these questions.
Yeah. So it's kind of instead of the exit tickets, like the entry ticket. So coming to class, you have to have these 3 questions before we even get started. That's a great example. Provide opportunities for students to summarize or synthesize concepts in own words. That one's kind of similar. Let me go to the next one. You or the student clarify or expand word meanings or confusing text. Does anyone think they have a good activity or a strategy for achieving this strategy?
I mean, just in terms of conversation, I will ask them to, give me whatever the confusing text was, or words that they needed more. And if they don't put any forth, then I'll bring up one. And then when everybody's looking at me like, oh, so you didn't understand it as much as you thought you did. Okay, so before I answer, I ask them to, I'm like, and I always tell my students to be loud, strong, and wrong. I got this from a teacher a long time ago.
That's pretty good.
So don't be afraid, to be wrong.
Yeah.
Everybody's wrong with you right now. So, so they try to piece it together and they work together to define it. And then I give them, I tell them if they're right and I expand on it.
Yeah, that's great. And I do that one in my class too when we're reading journal articles. So I'll bring the actual article because I read it too. I wrote in the margins too. And I'll ask them, in this section, were there any confusing words that you didn't understand? And no one says anything. I'm like, well, what about this word? Because that was one that I had to look up because I didn't know it.
Right.
And so then I show them, that I looked it up and I wrote the definition in the margin. And that once you come up to those words, just stop. Don't go forward until you are make sure you're clear. Yeah.
And then I also ask to see their book. Like, okay, if this was something that you had a challenge with, why don't I see something written? Why didn't you look it up and write it in the margin? And I do bring my book to every class and show them I still do this. Even in my leisure reading, you can look at my book and see I still do this.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. So often students don't write in the book because they want to be able to sell it back or something like that. There's no point to that. This next one is in italics because it's really hard to do this one in a class like ADW. And I know that this is notoriously the lowest on our biweekly surveys, allowing students to predict. So if you can't achieve that one, don't worry about it. That one's really difficult for students to kind of predict what's coming next in a particular reading.
How would you do that?
It's easier on text that's kind of like in a certain story, a sequential order.
Okay.
But with some of the concepts that they're reading, it's hard to predict what's coming next. So that one I don't even worry about. I'll probably just take it off the biweekly survey altogether. Share with students how you think. So again, this is just modeling. Promoting metacognitive behaviors, planning, monitoring, evaluating through your responses to students. Explicitly discuss metacognition with the students. I know during the very first semester we said, don't use the word metacognition, but it's out there, so use it. It's totally fine. And like Mr. Geddes said during his workshop, it is helpful for students to be able to put terms with what they're learning. So feel free to use the term and talk to students about how you approach learning. Clearly state the objectives for the current class session. So again, giving them a guide, and then that's also something they can put on their note-taking sheet. This is the objective for the class. And encouraging students to monitor, evaluate how well they're learning in the classroom. So these are all of the questions that you see on the biweekly survey. In addition to the last 2 questions that we already talked about, so helping students to become self-aware and encouraging behavioral change. So are there any questions, comments, or suggestions about changing the biweekly survey?
In terms of using the word, you say using the word metacognition in class, would you suggest then that when we introduce it to the students, go to the etymology of the word and explain it to them and give them a better understanding of meta and cognitive?
That's a great idea.
And then just take it from there, so maybe that'll increase their understanding. It's, now I know what metacognition is, and go through. I mean, being in the world languages, when I'm teaching in Spanish, we have to go through a lot of that, and I go back to the Latin and everything like that. and it appears that a light comes on, oh, now I got it. And they can relate that to other words in different, even into English, no? So I'm saying that may be a tool that we can use if you think that.
Absolutely, I think that's great, yeah.
To use.
Yeah, and we've never talked about that, but actually breaking down the word, that'll help them to remember what it is.
That's
What
the
is
only way I
that?
learned. I had to break them.
Yeah, I love that idea, because that will help them to remember what it is, instead of just this medical condition, whatever it is we're supposed to be learning. They'll think about the meaning of the word. Love that idea.
Has there been a study done to, just because we're doing a very focused kind of, course on African diaspora, and I was just wondering if metacognitive thinking is not contained in any one particular cultural domain. I would think there are concepts that correlate to this in other languages, as you mentioned. And I'm just wondering if we could draw on, or is there some research that...
I'll have to look into it. I haven't come across anything. I by no means there's not anything there. But that would be really interesting to look at cross-cultural studies.
I'd be interested to know if you find out something.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
very interested in that.
Yeah, I'll look into that. Thank you for the idea. Anything else you would like to see on the bi-weekly surveys that would help you or give us a better idea of what's taking place in the classroom? Okay, well, if you think of anything, feel free to shoot me an email. So for the rest of the workshop, we have about 40 minutes left. We'll do group activities, applying these terms that we see on the bi-weekly survey to the actual terms of engagement. So in their workshop this morning, the control group, they worked with the terms of engagement to, let's see, what did they do? They provided takeaways for the students based on three takeaways for students for each term of engagement. So I'm going to hand out what they did, and we'll use this as a guide. And I put you in groups randomly. And just for time's sake, if we only have time to do one term of engagement each, that's perfectly fine. So each group is assigned 2 or 3 terms. I'd like you to provide an example of how you could implement each metacognitive strategy with your terms of engagement, and then report those out to the group. So first I'll hand out the terms of engagement that the control group worked with. So for each term, they created 3 takeaways for students. And if you disagree with the takeaways, if you want to add your own, please feel free to do so. And we'll be moving around so you can sit with your group. Randomly, all the guys doing together.
I thought there was a gender.
No, that was random. That was random. And Harun is there. He's just not here. That was totally random. So those are your terms, and now I'm handing out your metacognitive strategies that are on the bi-weekly survey. And it should be all the terms. I don't know if all the terms are there. It looks like some might be.
On the yeah, I didn't see all of them.
Yeah, so they're not all. Okay.
I'm sick of the heat of your truck.
Yeah, but that could be like if they did this before, they should ask them to say what funders to give.
Secondly, get the consensus from all, understanding we're going to use the word consensus, that's what it means, we're going to use avoidance, that's what it is. And then the third thing, this is where you are right now, Alex, so what's your step?
Yeah, we're gonna have like what, 1 minute conversation.
Intersection.
But I usually looking at concept.
I'm sorry. Because we're looking for this piece. So it's a pedagogy of your class. How do you define? Because he talks about the president talking about the banking education, and then you have
So that, back to prior knowledge.
back to prior knowledge again, yeah.
But the
fragmentation, let me
You
change.
should be able to do this, that,
maybe different banking system.
But to put it in African symbol.
That's the one, problem posing, that's a major.
Double, in other words, it's gonna be two things, completely. So it could be how we
Banking education, from the problem posing education.
of pain with the
You know, until my reading of this. I read it.
we're not aware of this.
Okay, see posing because my experience is now.
It doesn't start with or not. Just with self-development. In terms of self-development, it's a cycle. Inferiority complex.
In fact, yeah. And then we believe everything and say, okay, this elite group did it, that's
Understand how our rights are.
decision making. Society's free.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
Fact versus myth versus
I was reading that, and I just some of the old stories on
And she said to me, imagine if it would have been me.
in how.
Before we get into the group presentations, I just want to acknowledge that Dr. Lockhart has the correct answer, where I did not, as far as the founder of metacognition. Could you please give us the reference again?
Oh, it's John Flavel, 1979, and let's see, I'll tell you what, metacognition and cognitive monitoring, new area of cognitive development, and it's from 1979. But he's the one who coined the phrase.
Thank you.
How you spell his name? Flavell. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that. I had a decade and not a year or name, so I appreciate the reference. All right, so group wants to go first. Okay.
No, we could have space.
It's up to you. You don't have to stand. You can just give us your term and what you came up with.
Okay. So the term that we chose was diaspora, since it wasn't on the list. And for the first one, we're providing opportunities for students to generate questions. We said the independent scholar worksheet, because in it, before you read it, you have to write down what you know about the subject, and then you have to come up with 3 questions. And then after you read, you write down what you learned, and then another 3 questions. So using, in the classroom, I would have them fill it out before and after they read, and then I would ask them to give me the questions that they had before, and they have to ask the class. So that way, it's not on me, it's on them, and they're answering and reacting, and possibly coming up with new questions based on their peers' questions.
Awesome. I like the questions at the end too, because they may have different questions at the end.
For the next one, we thought about this thing that Jonathan called six-word autobiography. How many books was it? I don't know. Where after an experience or something, you have to capture your understanding in 6 words. So then we came up with an idea, 6-word recap, which is a summary of whatever they read, whether it's a section or a whole thing. But in order to be able to come up with those 6 words, it requires some kind of synthesis and understanding that, so 6-word recap, which could be kind of fun just to have them, have them maybe write them on the board or something and then to talk about them afterwards.
And then for clarifying and expanding word meanings, there were 2 things. So we talked about how the etymology is a great way to do that, but also modeling what we do. So if I don't know a concept or a word, I'm going to the dictionary, I'm going to Wikipedia, yes. And then I'm trying to figure out, have I seen this word before? Because it happens a lot with students. They've seen the word, they know how to pronounce the word, they know some of the context of the word, but they don't actually know the real definition. And so you're making sure that I know the definition, I'm looking to see where I've seen it before, asking around like, hey, I'm gonna use this in a sentence. Does this sound right? So using your peers to help teach you,
And then the last one, we only got to 4, was a series of questions. So there's a reading or something, and so ask students what stands out for you, and then why does this stand out for you? What's in the text or your previous understanding? Do you remember it? Okay, anyway.
This is for number 5.
Right, thank you. And then how does this relate to other readings, classes, your life, etc.? So then we talked about it for a while, and then the question arose, is this really metacognitive, because is there a level of self-reflection? So then we came up with another question. What do you think you need in order to understand or deepen your understanding? And reflect on how you've learned to answer this question. So, does that work?
Yes, that was great. And so you were metacognitive about your own. Yeah, great. Thank you. Another group, excuse me, with your hand up.
So for the first one, we had we chose construction of knowledge. So for the first one, we were talking about applying this to Crit Crack and the Frary reading, and we drew upon this classroom assessment tools sheet. And so we looked at KWL, just to break down the term construction of knowledge, and then taking those responses and seeing, okay, based on those responses, how do you apply that to find your muddiest point with either Crit Crack or the Frary, depending on how you want to frame the class. So we were talking about how there are benefits of introducing the Frary first with this breakdown and then going to Crit Crack, since Frary is that framework, or using the Crit Crack because it's a shorter text and then going into Frary in this case. Then for number 2, We also said Muddy's point was good too because readings can be dense. And we also talked about directed paraphrasing. So we kind of picked one of the texts that we saw as kind of difficult, more difficult for students, and so we picked gender as an analytic category. And what they had said was that they had done exercises in their classes with directed paraphrasing to specific audiences. So explain this to your grandmother, explain this to your 7-year-old, or my 7-year-old son. So that was it for number 2. For number 3, what was it? Muddy's point. Muddy's point is great. We like to Muddy's point. And we talked about modeling and highlighting. And so in an actual activity where you have everybody literally taking a passage and say, underline a word you don't understand, circle this, or, kind of breaking down or giving different tools of how you can break down specifically reading. For number 4, we talked about allowing students to predict, so really putting that in the planning stage. And so predicting the meaning of the title, like looking at a book like
that's a good use,
And so,
for that one, I typically don't ask them about predicting what will come next in the reading, but I did ask them to use some of the images, like for Gomez, I asked them to look at the image on the front of the text. The first couple of times I did it, they weren't expecting me to ask them that question, or to take the title of the text and think about, okay, what do you think the author's going to be talking about? How do you think this is going to relate back to the theme for the week, that kind of thing. Some of the images, some of the titles of the text, and then we just kind of use it as a springboard to drive the following discussion.
That's a great use of prediction. So if we can maybe I'll keep it after all. No changes instead of what's coming next.
So for the last one, we were talking about, of course, bringing our books, like the suggestion was in the example we showed, bringing your books and sharing the comments that you make in the text. And then we talked about taking it a step further and welcoming feedback from the class on our own processes. So is this kind of commenting helpful? What would you do? So yeah, they go.
Sounds great. Thank you. Another group is ready to go? All right.
Okay, we had the concept of identity, the term identity, and it's quite similar to what both groups have shared, but for the first one, yes, we would use something similar to the independent scholar worksheet, but just the class learning outcomes. So the students will already come to class with at least the first page filled out, which is what they already know, and then questions that they already have. So that'd be a planning mode. For number 2, I was looking at the sheet here. We can have students, the professor can extract maybe one of the most significant paragraphs or 2 from one of the readings on identity. And with that, for an activity, in fact, we can do 2 here. We can do the 1-minute paper to gauge how they understand those significant quotes. And then for the second activity, we can do the muddiest point. What don't you understand? So those are 2 different activities there. Number 3, clarify and expand word meanings. That's the muddiest point activity. Where the students write down confusing text. And they can pair up with each other. Say, hey, this is how I understand this term, this is how I understand that term, or this is how I don't understand a particular term. Number 4, we kind of blazed through that. But for number 5, we did make it to number 5. And again, Professor shares how he or she, defined this word. But we can take it a step further to go beyond definitions. Can you apply the term to a current event or something that's happening, especially here on campus with identity, spellman's transgender policy? And if they can't come up with the current event, maybe they can create an example using that term of engagement.
That's great. One of our last 2 groups.
No, please.
Okay, so
we kind of did it in a different sequence, so we didn't go like step 1 through 11. But for instance, we were looking at trans identity. Starting off with, of course, you know, this is specifically what our goals and outcomes are for having this conversation. And first taking trans and cis and breaking those down. Because I think, again, students think they understand the concept, they've heard it a lot, they've seen it in, you know, there's a new show Pose on, you know, different things like that. So I think they think they understand certain concepts, but let's break it down so that you completely understand where it comes from and where it is. So clarifying those word meanings. And that's also having them summarize in their own words. Then we were looking at explicitly, you know, discussing metacognition, but also in terms of connecting it to trans identity, not just thinking about your overall thinking, but thinking about this concept, right? And also connecting it to, and when you're monitoring and evaluating your understanding, we're also looking at how you feel about the concept. Because the students have a lot of feelings connected to it, especially with the policy on campus. So we're talking about that. You know, we talked about doing the heteronormativity checklist, but also creating more items that are specific to trans identity, because the heteronormativity checklist is very much kind of covering just LGBTQIA+, and not specific to trans identity. So creating more items specific to that. And then, what was the other one?
Showing pictures of people and who may have trans identity and discussing them, and possibly showing a clip from the Janet Mock video, and then as a reflection activity they would write a reflection about their own biases in terms of trans identity.
And actually talking about these biases and working through them and recognizing where they are. And even when they're speaking, and they, you know, because the students will say, well, I don't have a problem with that. And then they'll say something that's completely biased, calling them out and saying, okay, so this is what I'm talking about. That was very biased. So you may not understand or acknowledge that level of bias, but let's talk about where this is coming from and process through it. So, and then, you know, also with a conversation like that, then checking in with them and kind of debriefing. So that level. What is the next one?
We did intersectionality next.
Intersectionality was an interesting conversation.
It was.
But we talked about not just talking about their different identities. So again, going through those processes and breaking down what all of those things look like. And this is also connected because we have race as well. So also connecting that as well. But looking at there was a specific word I'm looking for. So not just looking at like we're both women, we're both Black. However, there's still layers within that Black experience. So whereas my sister has lighter skin than I do, we also had different experiences, and people would say different things to us based on that phenotypical appearance, even though we look like twins. But her lighter skin had people saying that she was more beautiful than I was. And it wasn't until I was older that I dealt with that. But, you know, just showing that there's a complexity even within that level where you think we're in the same overlapping. So we talked about doing overlapping circles, where the students could look at where circles overlapped and where a circle was an outlier. So for instance, if I walked into a room with my students dressed the same way, we may be treated the same until somebody then asks what I do. And they say they're a student and I say, oh, I'm a professor. And then there's like, oh, you know, where people kind of start treating you different than that. So now that circle's no longer overlapping as much. I'm now kind of over here based on that class stratification. So having them do, you know, that and, you know, just reflecting on their personal experiences within that as well and discuss. So we're discussing fragmentation of identities as well as those overlapping in the dynamics. And then when we got to race, we were also talking about looking at, so we talk about where the concept came from as we are defining it and working through the definition. So also showing them Carl von Linné's original stratification of race and having them, okay, so just giving them the definition, like who do you think he's talking about for this one? Who do you think he's talking about? Talking about how all groups have a stratification system, but also connecting it to power. And that's why That's why Europeans have been able to create this and it stick, because they also have that power dynamic. So we're also going back to intersectionality with that.
It all ties together.
So I hope we did what we were
Y'all did work. Sounds good, thank you. And last group.
Well, we sort of divided this, into the before conversation, before the conversation, during the conversation, and after. So it's just like, everybody else, so for the before prior knowledge, so we would check on students' knowledge of, consciousness or definition, their ability to define, well, first of all, let's back up and say that we selected critical consciousness. Okay. So consciousness, pedagogy, knowledge, and oppression. What is your knowledge, of these terms? Then, in terms of the objective for the conversation, what we would hope is that the students would be able to, at the end of the conversation, differentiate between the banking system of education versus the problem-posing system, understand decision-making using science, and then also how historical narratives are constructed. For the during part, we would ask them why they chose Spelman. Is it because, when your mom or sister or, auntie, attended Spelman? And how familiar are you, if at all, with the institution's mission statement? And then how does that connect to, those 4 texts, especially the prairie, as if the banking, but do we tend to favor the institution, banking system of education, or the problem solving? In terms of activities, we would, we had several. One would be ask them to reflect on personal experience, or their personal experience or experiences in the classroom, and sort of reflect, and figure out which one of the 2 approaches their teacher favored, and provide specific examples. Anything else you guys want to add? And how, again, all of this compare, to the 4 articles. And in terms of, after class or the takeaway, there are several, we considered several options, but one was, again, bringing this home and help the students understand that what they learn really, has a bearing on, their everyday life, and use current event, again, looking at the whole controversy, surrounding the meeting between the president's, son and whoever else was with him, sitting at that meeting. And so what narratives obtained? What is the president saying? What is his son saying? What is the media saying? So forth and so on.
And we would also, just added to that, we would also have them to, as a takeaway, to analyze at this point, some of the media, what's going on in current events, the shootings, for example, that we're saying so often that we were talking about, and just like we said, the president thing, they can analyze that now out of a different lens, opposed to when they're just coming into our class, they hear this, we talk about this. Now, based on what you received in the class, how do you perceive that information? How do you analyze? How do you just dissect that, that's out there now? And that's what we want them to look at. And then hopefully we'll get a holistic approach to their thought process. And they'll come back and maybe have a different person in the class.
Hey, wow, sounds good. That was great. That was very rich ideas. I think you all are ready for the semester. Ready to go. I know we're a little past time, so the last thing is just our evaluation, and I have an updated cheat sheet for you all. I know I gave you a cheat sheet a couple of years, maybe a year ago. This one is just updated to include the self-assessment behavioral change reminder. And so as I said, it was helpful to just kind of have this at the podium while we were leading class discussions. Just a little reminder of things that should be happening in the classroom each week.
Yeah. No, no, of course not.
That would be my first Wednesday going to the class. Yeah, you know, going through this and then knowing that I just want to have a dialogue with them. Say, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it.
So you should have the link for the workshop evaluation in your email. And just send it to everyone.
You may use this.
Oh, so this is,
I'm putting it away.
What about the
No, that, it was gonna be for an icebreaker, but we didn't have time.
Oh, okay.
Evaluation link, yeah. Oh, okay, I'm thinking are we old fashioned guys? We need to do
Just the elevation.
Yeah, one card.
I know, the instructor knows what they're doing.
All right, so we're all finished. If everyone could just please be sure to do the evaluation, if not now, sometime soon. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Hope everyone has a great semester. Please come and see me if you have any questions or anything.
Where's your office?
I'm in Giles 323.
You know, thank you.
323. Yeah, third floor.
323. Okay. I get it mixed up. Numbers, I'm trying to see numbers. Numbers are the hardest thing. Alphabet, right? And I know the statistics. Teaching is, teaching the student language.
Do you have an agent?
I get them and I say, what is your phone number? And they can't, you know, and I say, I said, you can give it to mine. And then I say, here's your phone number.